Today on this video, I'm going to be showing you guys how to cut 540 waves. Stay tuned for the transformation, y'all. YouTube, what is good, y'all? Today we got another video, man, and we're gonna be doing a 540 wave cut today. My boy's been wolfing for about 3 months now, so as you can see, it's looking really long, so we're gonna get right into it. So first, we always want to start off by combing out the hair, and the reason being is because with wavers, typically when they brush their hair, they are laying it down on the surface of their head, so we want to pick everything out. We want to comb everything out because we want to be able to get this natural looking length. So now we're going in with our number 3 guard. I started off with my number 3 just because I wanted to make sure, usually with straight hair wavers, you always do want to go with a higher guard, just because since their hair is not as coarse, their curl is not as tight, you don't want to really cut down the wave too much. So I started off with my 3, and then I noticed that it wasn't really taking off too much, so I dropped down to my number 2, and I seen that it is taking out a good amount, the length that we kind of agreed on. So now I'm just going over with my number 2 guard, and right after that we're combing out our crown area, making sure that we're getting all the hair lifted off of the surface. And same thing, we are following the way the waves are laying. So his is a 540, which means that it's not laying directly flat going downward, but it's going diagonally. So we want to make sure that we pay attention to how the wave is laying and the pattern of the hair is laying, because we don't want to patch his hair. And basically what patching is when you go the opposite direction that the wave is laying. So now we're going with the crown, we're going right against it, and we want to make sure that once again we are following the direction that the hair is laying. And typically it is a little bit harder around the crown because it goes in a swirl, so you might have to kind of change your direction. So now we're going to start off by debulking our area. We're going in with a number 3 guard, and I'm going right underneath that first wave. I never really want to go over that first wave with a waver's haircut, just because they work so hard to maintain and keep their waves. So the last thing I want to do is just cut it all off. And now we're going to be going in with our skeleton trimmers, and we're just going to be creating our first guideline. I'm going to be giving him a low taper. So the way I set my guideline is kind of like a triangle roundish shape, just because I do want to make sure I keep his C cup dark. So now I'm going in with my 1.5, and we're just going to be debulking again, working our way down, making sure that we're giving ourselves enough space because it's going to be a tight area for this taper. So right now we're going in with our no guard lever all the way open, and we're going to be creating our second guideline, and it's following the exact same shape that we did when we put in our trimmers. And right now we're going all the way closed, and we're going to be removing that first initial guideline. So we start all the way closed, we go up about 1/4 inch, and then we slowly start to open it. So we want to make sure we knock out that bottom guideline first, guys. Really make sure you take the time to knock it out. And right now I go halfway, and I'm just going to be going up a little bit more just to make sure I get rid of that last middle guideline. And now what you see me do is just lever play, so any little dark spots that you see, because sometimes they might have inconsistent lengths, so you just want to make sure that you find any of the little dark spots and just take them out before you move on. Alright, so now we're going in with our number 1 guard all the way open, and this essentially is going to be our last guard because we did go in with our number 1.5 to debulk, so we're pretty much using our last guide. And the goal here is not to create another guideline, it's just to blend into that 1.5. Alright, so now we're going in with our 0.5 guard halfway, and we're just going to be detailing out that middle line. It basically already is blended in, but we still want to follow our system and trust our process. So usually when it comes to tapers, guys, I don't like to use the full blade at all. I only use the last 2 to 3 teeth, just because it is such a small surface area. It's such a small space, so we want to make sure that we're being specific on what we're trying to take out. And now I've closed it all the way, just making sure that that last bottom guideline is done with. So we're going to be following the exact same steps on this side. And you guys have to make sure you're being crucial with how you set your guidelines. For me, the reason why I set these guidelines, like I said, is because we're working in a small area. And if you want to have that nice burst transition, creating a flat squared guide is going to make it a lot harder to keep your C cup darker. So for me, that's the reason why I created like in a curved motion. And I'm not gonna lie to you guys, this haircut did take a while. When it comes to straight wavers, it is hard. The hardest part is probably blending into the wave. You know, doing the taper itself is not so difficult because it's not a lot of surface area to work with. But when it comes to blending into the wave, that for me personally is the hardest part. But we're getting it done, y'all. So now we're with our number 1 guard all the way closed, and we're just softening up that middle guideline so that when we go back in right now with our 0.5 guard, it's going to help take it out a lot easier. Once again, all the way closed, just making sure we're getting rid of that last initial guideline. And then to finish it off, we're going in with our number 1.5, and we're just going to be detailing. So I'm going to go from my 1.5 maybe to my 1, just to make sure I got to do what I got to do to get out that last initial guideline. Also keeping in mind not to go past that first wave, like I said, because these wavers, man, they work hard for their waves, so we don't want to take away the work that they be doing. Alright, so now we're going to be working on the back, and we're going in with our number 3 guard, and I always like to go with my number 3, just because I want to make sure that there's no gaps or patches. Right now, as you can see, what I'm doing to help blend into that first initial wave is I'm going to be going with the grain with the number 2. Because his hair is straight, after you take it down, sometimes you might see it start to poke out, so going in with that number 2 is really going to help lay down that hair. And you see me going against the grain right now, but I'm going to be going against and with the grain with my number 2, because my mission is to help lay that wave down as good as possible. So about right now, I'm going to be showing you how much space we need for every single guideline. So we put our trimmer where we need our space to be created, and also the reason why I put my trimmer guideline there is because, as you can see, those 2 light spots, we don't want to put our guideline a little bit lower than where the lightest spot is, because it's going to be a lot harder for us to fade out. So for us to make our lives easier, all I'm doing is I'm starting at the lightest point, which is above those 2 light spots. So once we create our first ball guideline, we see how much space we need to take to finish out our blend. So I started with my number 2, and the reason why I put my 2 fingers there was because every guideline is about a finger's width. So now we go with our open, which is our first guideline, and then we'll go with our number 1 open, which will basically blend into that number 2. So that's why I put my 2 fingers there. That's what I usually do. I give myself the 2-finger rule or the 3-finger rule. So if I'm blending into a number 3, I'll give myself 3 fingers. If I'm blending into a number 2, I'll give myself 2 fingers from wherever I create that ball guideline. Just as a tip, y'all. So now we are blending out that last initial guideline. We're going in with our number 1, and this should be the final guard that we use, besides the 1.5 to help blend into that wave. And as you can see, his hair is growing in multiple directions, so we have to make sure that we are attacking it against the grain, which means we got to go in different directions also. And with these haircuts, y'all, it's more detail oriented, making sure that we're getting all the little hairs that we need to, because like I said, it is very spaced out. The hair does grow in many different directions, so it's a tricky one. But if you follow your system and you trust your process, it'll all work out. So now we're going in with our number 1.5, and we're just going to be finishing off our last, not guideline, but our last area where it's, needs to be touched up a little bit, where you see some dark spots and whatnot. So we will be going in with our 1.5, and then we're going to be dropping down back to our 1, just to detail out those little areas. And typically what I like to do is, if I fade upwards, the way I cross check is by fading back downwards. So that's how I usually do it, going up to my longest guard, which is my 1.5, and then I'll start dropping it back down from my 1 to my 0.5, back to my open. Alright, so now we're going to be working on our lineup. So what I typically like to do before I prep my lineup is, I do like to take down the bulk. I'll usually go with the number, if I go with the 3 open, I'll go with the 3 closed. And now I'm starting my first initial point when it comes to my lineup at the neck taper, and I start below the ear because that's where it naturally already kind of lines. So now what I'm doing is I'm following that first guideline that we created, and I'm just following the natural shape. I don't want to push it in too much, so I'm keeping it as natural as possible, but also making sure that it is sharp. I like to make it slope inward a little bit. I don't always like to create the straight box going down, because it does look a little bit weird. And the reason why I did debulk the area a little bit was because I don't want so much overlaying hairs on the neck lineup. And when I notice that I go with a guard lower, it does help lay down the hair better, and it makes the lineup become a little bit more crispier. So for me personally, that's something that I learned, and we're doing the same thing on the other side. So as you can see, like I said, the curve already naturally wants to be there, so I'm just following the shape of the natural curve, and that helps set in the position to follow the downward slope. So I make sure that I comb, I brush the hairs, making sure that there's no overlaying hairs, making sure that I'm getting everything. So now that I've created that nice little arch, I'm just going to continue going down. And as you can see, you can kind of already see the way that it naturally wants to be lined. So I'm just following that exact shape. And some people have really hairy necks, so there's going to be times where you might have to, quote unquote, get a little cosmetic. And now we're lining up our C cup. So I do 2 points. I make my first point at the top of the C, and I make my second point at the bottom of the C cup of the curve. And basically all I do after that is I connect them together, basically like drawing it in. You have to imagine your trimmers as a pencil, and you're just drawing in that line using my corners. That's it, just drawing it in, guys. Barbering is like an art. That's what y'all have to say. Barbering is like an art. So you could choose, whatever type of art you want to make it, but it is an art. So just treat it like it is. And we're doing the exact same steps on the other side, y'all. So now prepping for the lineup. All this overhanging hair that you see, I'm not pushing his hairline back, and right now I'm just showing you where his natural hairline already starts. So this is all overhang. And typically with wavers, they do have a lot of overlaying hair because they grow out their hair for a long time. So don't be afraid to have to push it back, quote unquote, when you're just realistically bringing it to its natural lineup. So we're going to start in the middle, and then we're going to work our way to one side, and then go back to the middle and work our way to the other side. Especially when it comes to a straight hair waver, the hair does tend to move in and out of positions a lot of times, so you want to make sure you're constantly brushing the hair forward, making sure that it's not bouncing back into a tight curl. So now that we've done the left side, we're going to work our way over to the right side. And some trimmers don't really catch straight hair too well. For me, I find that the skeletons, they don't really catch straight hair too well. I usually use it more for my coarse hair wavers, or my coarse hair in general, my curly hair, more tight curled hair. Typically I do recommend using like a Slimline Pro. I do think they catch straight hair like amazingly well, but we're working with what we got. So now we are lining up his vertical bars, and they are a little bit light, but we still want to keep them as natural as possible. And one thing I did notice was there was a little bit of weight right on the corner, so I just went over and did a little bit of clipper over comb, clipper over trimmer, just to kind of blend into the vertical bar to make sure that it all looks in place. All right, so now we're going to be lining them up, and we start always by stretching the skin, laying the blade flat. And there's multiple ways that you can prep the skin. Usually I like to prep it with putting some alcohol on just to dry out the skin. You can put shave gel, whatever the case may be, but just make sure you do some type of prepping for the hairline so that it does come out super clean. And right here I noticed that there was a couple overlaying hairs, so what I'm doing right now is I'm just cleaning them up, making sure that this lineup is clean. And just to finish it off, I'm adding some olive oil, some olive sheen, just to make the waves pop a little bit. And boom, my boy spinning, man. Got him back in the game, y'all. I hope this helped you guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you guys on the next one. Take care, y'all.